In the heart of winter, when the world grows still and the days shorten, humanity seeks warmth. Not only in fire and food, but in meaning. Across centuries, salt has been a symbol of purity, covenant, and endurance. It was never merely seasoning. It was sacred matter. In the Torah, salt sealed promises between man and God, between one generation and the next. But why, you may ask, would a modern soul, living among lights and cities, need to remember salt? The answer begins with a story. There was once a humble rabbi in Tzfat who each winter would sprinkle salt not only on his bread, but upon his doorstep, his window, and his threshold. When asked why, he smiled and said, "Salt preserves what should not decay. Even faith can sour when left unattended." This story is not about superstition, but awareness. The ancients saw salt as the boundary between the sacred and the spoiled. They believed that when one placed salt in 7 places, the home, the table, the heart, the speech, the hands, the path, and the memory, they invited the divine to act through order, clarity, and renewal. This reflection will explore the 7 symbolic places where the Torah's wisdom says salt must dwell, not as ritual magic, but as a spiritual act of preservation. You will see that salt, humble and silent, carries within it one of life's greatest truths, that what is preserved is not only the body, but the soul's covenant with time itself. So let us begin our journey through the 7 places of salt. 7 doors that, when kept pure, allow God's light to enter even the darkest corners of a human life. Topico 1. The salt of the table. Where gratitude begins. In every Jewish home, the table is not merely furniture. It is the altar of the everyday. When bread is placed upon it, a small dish of salt accompanies it. This simple act is ancient, echoing the offerings of the temple, where no sacrifice was ever made without salt. The Torah declares, "You shall season all your offerings with salt. The salt of the covenant of your God shall not be lacking." But what does it mean today, when our altars are wooden tables and our sacrifices are made of time, attention, and love? To place salt on the table means to preserve gratitude. Gratitude, like bread, spoils quickly if not tended. The salt at the table is a reminder that every meal is a dialogue between the Creator and the created, between the one who eats and the one who provides. There is a Hasidic tale of a poor merchant who once complained to his rabbi that his meals tasted bitter, though his wife used the finest spices. The rabbi smiled and replied, "You are tasting not the food, but your forgetfulness." He gave the man a pinch of salt and said, "Place this on your bread, and before you eat, whisper, 'This too is from God.'" The merchant did so. His next meal was filled with sweetness, not because the salt changed the flavor, but because it preserved the awareness of blessing. At the table, salt becomes the guardian of joy. It reminds us that every bite is a bridge between sustenance and sanctity, between body and soul. In this way, salt transforms eating into an act of holiness. The table is the first of the 7 places because it teaches balance. To eat without gratitude is to consume emptiness. To eat with remembrance is to taste eternity. When salt rests beside the bread, it tells us that preservation begins not in the pantry, but in the heart. In our time, many people have lost this sense of sacred rhythm. Meals are hurried, screens glow, and conversation fades. Yet the salt on the table can restore stillness. It says, pause, taste, remember. For nothing you have is truly yours until you recognize its source. The Torah calls salt the covenant of permanence. That is why, when 2 friends share bread with salt, they renew trust. The sages say that a home where salt and bread meet is one where misfortune cannot linger, not because salt has magic, but because remembrance has power. So, as this Christmas season unfolds, a time of lights and giving, remember the first place to keep your salt, on your table, beside your daily bread. Let it remind you that gratitude is the root of abundance, and that when you preserve thankfulness, you make room for divine provision. For in every crumb salted with gratitude, the Eternal smiles and whispers, "My covenant is still with you." There is a saying among the sages, "A home without discernment is like a gate without hinges. Everything enters, and everything departs. The doorstep, in Torah symbolism, is not merely wood and stone. It is the line between the world's noise and the soul's peace. It is where you decide what you allow to cross into your inner life. In ancient homes of Israel, people would sometimes scatter a pinch of salt at the threshold before Shabbat. It was not a superstition, but a declaration. This home belongs to holiness. Let no decay, no bitterness, no anger pass within. The salt stood as a silent guard, preserving the spirit of the house as it preserved food in the desert. To place salt at your doorstep is to affirm that your peace is sacred. Every visitor brings energy. Every word that enters leaves a trace. The Torah teaches that even a word can bless or wound, and that a wise person builds gates for speech and walls for the heart. So too must we guard our homes, not with suspicion, but with awareness. There was a widow in Jerusalem who lived beside a noisy marketplace. Merchants argued, children cried, and beggars quarreled outside her door. Yet within, her home was serene. When asked how she kept such peace, she said, "Each morning I bless the threshold with salt and whisper, 'Only truth and kindness may cross.' The rest stays outside." Her practice was not ritual but wisdom. She understood that the doorstep is the meeting point between two worlds, the outer chaos and the inner covenant. To preserve that boundary is to keep your soul from being diluted by the noise of the age. When you walk through your own door, whether after work, after conflict, or after doubt, pause for a moment. Imagine sprinkling a few grains of salt upon your threshold, real or in spirit. Say silently, "What enters here will find peace. What leaves here will carry blessing." In that instant, your home becomes a temple, and you, its priest. Salt at the doorstep is also a reminder of humility. The Talmud says that God dwells not in palaces, but in the homes of those who invite peace. When you place salt there, you are not commanding angels or warding demons. You are preserving your own awareness that holiness begins at the door. In modern life, our doorsteps are not only physical, they are the boundaries of our attention. The news we consume, the conversations we entertain, the emotions we let settle inside us. If you do not guard these thresholds, cynicism and despair will sneak in like thieves at night. But if you preserve them with salt, meaning with discernment and gratitude, your inner space remains pure. In one story, Rabbi Akiva said to his students, "A man who cannot say no at the gate will have to rebuild his walls every season." In what he meant is that a person without boundaries will always feel exhausted because the world's chaos is endless. The salt at the threshold is the power to say, "Not everything belongs here." As you enter the season of giving and gathering, think of your doorstep as a sacred marker. Before guests arrive, before gifts are exchanged, remember to guard your peace. Offer kindness freely, but not your serenity. The Torah never asked us to be walls, it asked us to be doors that open wisely. If the first salt on the table preserves gratitude, then the second, on the threshold, preserves peace. Together they form the foundation of blessing, a thankful heart, and a guarded home. So this Christmas, place a small bowl of salt by your door, or simply remember its lesson. Each time you step inside, you will know, I have entered a space that belongs to holiness. And as you cross out again into the world, you carry that peace with you, leaving a trace of preservation wherever you go. In the Torah, salt is both gentle and fierce. It purifies water, yet burns the wound. It preserves, yet if too much is used, it kills the seed. The sages saw in this duality the image of the human heart, capable of deep love and, when unguarded, deep bitterness. The heart is the third place where salt must dwell, for it is written, "Guard your heart above all things, for from it flow the springs of life." But how do we guard the heart without hardening it? How do we keep compassion alive in a world that too often rewards indifference? There is an old story told by Rabbi Elazar about a stonemason who carved for the temple. Every morning before lifting his tools, he would sprinkle a little salt upon his hands and touch his chest. "Why do you do this?" asked his apprentice. The mason answered, "Because stone without warmth cracks, and a man without mercy crumbles." The salt, to him, was a covenant, a reminder that his heart must remain tender even when his work demanded strength. To place salt upon the heart is not physical, but spiritual. It means to preserve tenderness, to prevent love from spoiling into resentment, to keep faith from becoming fanaticism, and to protect hope from corrosion. Compassion, like bread, must be renewed daily. Every disappointment, betrayal, or injustice can slowly sour it. Without awareness, kindness grows stale, empathy fades. That is why the sages said, "The wise renew mercy as others renew bread." But there is a paradox here. Salt comes from tears, the very sign of pain. How strange that God chose something born of sorrow to preserve goodness. Yet perhaps this is the hidden wisdom. Compassion is not born in comfort, but in the salt of suffering. The one who has wept for others cannot easily become cruel. When the Torah speaks of the covenant of salt, it is speaking to this endurance of love, love that survives decay. Every act of compassion is like a handful of salt cast into the waters of the world, purifying what has been polluted. In our age, where anger is fashionable and cynicism passes for wisdom, to have a heart preserved by salt is to resist decay. It is to keep loving even when the world tells you to turn cold. Perhaps you have known this feeling, when giving becomes painful, when trust feels dangerous. In such moments, remember the lesson of the stonemason. Touch your heart and whisper, "Do not let me turn to stone." That whisper is your salt, and if you wish to keep your heart alive, share its warmth. Generosity keeps compassion from stagnating. A heart that only receives eventually spoils. One that gives remains fresh. The Zohar teaches that salt joins water and fire. It harmonizes opposites. So too does compassion unite justice and forgiveness. When your heart holds both, the courage to correct and the grace to forgive, then you embody divine balance. During this Christmas season, when emotions run high and memories return, you may find salt already within you. In your tears, your longing, your quiet gratitude. Let them remind you that you are still alive, still capable of tenderness. So place salt in your heart. Preserve your empathy as the ancients preserved their offerings. For God acts most clearly through hearts that have not hardened. And remember, even when love hurts, even when kindness costs, the taste of salt reminds you that pain itself can be holy if it keeps compassion pure. If you are enjoying this reflection, subscribe to the channel and leave your comment. For a heart preserved in kindness is the true miracle of every season. And through such hearts, heaven still moves upon the earth. The sages once said, "Life and death are in the power of the tongue." The tongue, a small muscle hidden behind the teeth, holds the strength to build or destroy. It blesses and curses, heals and wounds. That is why the fourth place for salt, according to the wisdom of the Torah, is upon our speech. When a person seasons their words with salt, they preserve truth. Words without care decay into gossip, anger, or deceit. Words with too much salt, harshness, sarcasm, judgment, burn instead of preserve. But words measured with grace remain pure, enduring long after the echo fades. The Torah often connects salt with offerings, and offerings with the mouth, prayers, vows, promises. To salt the tongue, then, is to consecrate speech, to make every word an offering fit for the divine. A story is told about Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, who was once invited to dine with a wealthy merchant. The meal was splendid, but throughout it, the host boasted about his possessions, his servants, his wisdom. The rabbi listened silently. When the meal ended, he asked for a pinch of salt and sprinkled it upon his empty plate. The host was puzzled. "Why add salt when the food is gone?" he asked. Rabbi Chaim replied, "Because salt reminds me that flavor fades, but humility preserves." In that gentle act, he taught that salt is not only for food, but for words. It restrains arrogance, it cools pride, it keeps speech clean from decay. How many relationships, families, and communities crumble because words are left unguarded? A sentence can spoil trust in a moment. That is why the ancients believed that speech, like bread, must be seasoned carefully. There is a reason we speak of someone as salty wisdom. It is the mark of authenticity. But true salt does not sting, it purifies. The Talmud compares the wise person's words to salt upon meat. Sharp enough to cleanse, gentle enough to preserve. To place salt upon your tongue means to speak less, listen more, and weigh every word as though it were sacred. The sages say that we have two walls guarding the tongue, the teeth and the lips, because it must be twice protected. Words once spoken cannot be gathered again, just as spilled salt cannot be returned to its shaker. In daily life, this wisdom feels more urgent than ever. We live in an age of endless words, posts, opinions, debates, arguments, all spoken faster than the heart can discern. Yet the Torah invites us to slow down, to taste our speech before releasing it. Ask yourself, does this word preserve peace or spoil it? A mother once asked a rabbi how to teach her child not to gossip. He told her to tear open a pillow and release the feathers into the wind. "Now gather them," he said. She looked at him, startled. "That is what gossip does," he explained. "Once released, words can never be collected. Salted speech, however, is different. It blesses, it protects, it builds. The one who speaks with sincerity, restraint, and kindness becomes a vessel of divine wisdom. This Christmas, when conversations fill every table and every heart seeks to be heard, remember to salt your words. Let them be truthful but gentle, firm yet compassionate. If you must correct, do it as salt does, quietly, without spectacle, aiming to preserve what is good rather than to destroy what is flawed. And when you bless, bless deeply. For the Torah says that the righteous are the salt of the earth, meaning their words prevent the world from rotting in cynicism and cruelty. So before you speak, taste your words. Let them be few, meaningful, and alive. A single, salted word spoken in love can preserve an entire friendship, an entire home, perhaps even an entire soul. For the world is changed not by many voices shouting, but by one honest word that refuses to decay. The Torah teaches that the labor of your hands shall bless you, and it shall be well with you. But there is another verse, quieter yet just as powerful. All your offerings shall be salted with salt. The sages saw in this a hidden command, that even our deeds, not just our words, must be seasoned. Every act of work, kindness, or creation must carry intention, purity, and humility, as salt carries preservation. The fifth place for salt, then, is upon the hands, upon our work. Hands are the bridge between thought and reality. They turn prayer into bread, promise into action, faith into generosity. Yet, as generations learned, even good work can sour if done without purpose. Effort without heart becomes routine. Success without gratitude turns hollow. Salt upon the hands means to preserve meaning in our labor, to keep service from rotting into pride. There was once a craftsman in Aleppo known for carving olive wood. Each morning before he began, he dipped his fingers into a small bowl of salt and whispered, "Let this day's work be clean of vanity." When asked why, he said, "Because salt burns wounds, and pride is a wound that hides in the hands." His carvings were simple, but they lasted. People said they carried peace in them, as though the salt had entered the grain. This teaching is ancient. Salt, humble and constant, reminds us that nothing we do is purely our own. Even when our hands move, they move through the strength given by God. To forget this is to invite decay. The decay of arrogance, of greed, of restlessness. In every act of creation, we are invited to remember the source. The Torah tells us that when the priests placed salt upon the offerings, it symbolized partnership, human effort meeting divine blessing. Without the salt, the offering was incomplete. Without gratitude, our work is too. Salt on the hands means that we work not only for survival, but for sanctity. A baker who kneads dough with care, a nurse who comforts a stranger, a teacher who listens before instructing. All these are hands salted with purpose. Their labor does not fade, it preserves life. But there is another lesson hidden in this metaphor. Salt also stings when it meets a wound. The work we do, if honest, sometimes exposes pain, the pain of limits, fatigue, or failure. Yet that sting is healing. It purifies our motives, reminding us that the goal is not perfection, but sincerity. The Talmud says, "Greater is the one who earns and shares than the one who only gives." Because the former salts his earnings, he turns them into covenant. When you work and then bless others through that work, you preserve not only your livelihood, but your soul's integrity. In a modern world driven by speed and competition, salt invites stillness and meaning. It says, do less, but do it with heart. Measure your success not by applause, but by the peace it leaves behind. Imagine this. Before starting your day, you touch your hands together and whisper a short blessing. May what I build today last in kindness. That is salt. It's invisible, yet it transforms the entire taste of your day. Even a simple act, like preparing a meal or writing a message of comfort, can become an offering when seasoned with awareness. Salt reminds us that work is sacred only when it serves life, not ego. During this Christmas season, as you wrap gifts, cook meals, or help others, think of the salt upon your hands. Let your touch carry kindness, not haste. Let your effort speak of gratitude, not exhaustion. And when you give, give quietly. The Torah praises those whose right hand gives while the left does not know it. Why? Because true giving is salted with humility, pure, unseen, enduring. So place salt upon your hands, not literally, but spiritually. Let every gesture, every task, be an act of preservation, not depletion. For the work of your hands, when done in remembrance, becomes the very place where God acts through you. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle of all, that the eternal hides within ordinary work, waiting only for the touch of salted hands to be revealed. There is a passage in Proverbs that says, "The steps of a man are established by the Lord, and he delights in his way." The rabbis taught that this verse means more than divine guidance. It means divine participation, that each step taken in honesty becomes a sacred act. But for a step to remain pure, it must be salted. The sixth place for salt is upon the path, upon the way you walk through life, the direction you choose, and the footprint you leave behind. In the ancient world, salt was spread across roads after the rain to keep them firm. Without it, the ground turned to mud, travelers slipped and carts sank. In the same way, the moral path of a person, if not salted with integrity, becomes slippery. Without vigilance, good intentions sink into compromise. To salt the path is to preserve direction. It means choosing what is right even when it is inconvenient, remaining faithful when the world rewards deceit, and walking with humility when pride offers shortcuts. There was a rabbi in Krakow who would test his students not by how they spoke in class, but by how they behaved when they thought no one was watching. One night he followed a student who claimed to live by truth. The young man entered the synagogue after dark and began to polish the brass menorah, work no one had assigned him. When he finished, he whispered, "Let the light shine brighter for whoever comes next." The rabbi smiled and said later, "That boy's path is salted." Integrity, like salt, cannot be faked. It may be invisible, but its absence is immediately felt. The unseasoned path, the one walked with hidden motives or divided heart, always leaves behind decay. The Torah speaks often of the way of righteousness, not as a road of success, but as one of endurance. Just as salt preserves what would otherwise rot, integrity preserves the soul from moral corruption. You cannot control every storm, but you can keep your path from turning to mud. Many people walk fast, but without direction. Others walk slowly, but with purpose. The salted path favors the latter. It says, "Better a small, honest step than a long, dishonest leap." To walk with salt means to bring mindfulness to your choices, the way you treat a stranger, the way you speak of others when they are not present, the way you conduct your business, even when profit tempts you to bend truth. Every small step shapes the trail behind you. The sages say that when a person dies, the angels do not ask, "Did you know all the Torah, but did you walk it?" The path is the ultimate testimony. The world may forget your words, but it never forgets your trail. In modern times, our paths are digital as well as physical. The messages we post, the opinions we share, the promises we make, each one leaves a trace. Salt them with truth. Do not walk the road of deceit, even when the crowd marches that way. For the salted path may be narrow, but it is steady, and it leads toward peace. Once a traveler in the desert asked his guide why he carried salt instead of extra food. The guide answered, "Because food may spoil, but salt will preserve whatever I find." So too in life. Possessions fade, but character preserves what matters. This Christmas, when you look back on your year, examine your footprints. Where have they led? Whom have they helped? If you find parts of your path that have grown bitter or uneven, sprinkle them with repentance and humility, the truest forms of salt. For every soul walks through wilderness at times, but only the salted steps find their way home. And when God looks upon such a path, marked not by perfection but by honesty, he delights, for it tastes of the covenant that never spoils. There is a passage in Proverbs that says, "The steps of a man are established by the Lord, and he delights in his way." The rabbis taught that this verse means more than divine guidance. It means divine participation, that each step taken in honesty becomes a sacred act. But for a step to remain pure, it must be salted. The sixth place for salt is upon the path, upon the way you walk through life, the direction you choose, and the footprint you leave behind. In the ancient world, salt was spread across roads after the rain to keep them firm. Without it, the ground turned to mud, travelers slipped and carts sank. In the same way, the moral path of a person, if not salted with integrity, becomes slippery. Without vigilance, good intentions sink into compromise. To salt the path is to preserve direction. It means choosing what is right even when it is inconvenient, remaining faithful when the world rewards deceit, and walking with humility when pride offers shortcuts. There was a rabbi in Krakow who would test his students not by how they spoke in class, but by how they behaved when they thought no one was watching. One night he followed a student who claimed to live by truth. The young man entered the synagogue after dark and began to polish the brass menorah, work no one had assigned him. When he finished, he whispered, "Let the light shine brighter for whoever comes next." The rabbi smiled and said later, "That boy's path is salted." Integrity, like salt, cannot be faked. It may be invisible, but its absence is immediately felt. The unseasoned path, the one walked with hidden motives or divided heart, always leaves behind decay. The Torah speaks often of the way of righteousness, not as a road of success, but as one of endurance. Just as salt preserves what would otherwise rot, integrity preserves the soul from moral corruption. You cannot control every storm, but you can keep your path from turning to mud. Many people walk fast, but without direction. Others walk slowly, but with purpose. The salted path favors the latter. It says, "Better a small, honest step than a long, dishonest leap." To walk with salt means to bring mindfulness to your choices, the way you treat a stranger, the way you speak of others when they are not present, the way you conduct your business, even when profit tempts you to bend truth. Every small step shapes the trail behind you. The sages say that when a person dies, the angels do not ask, "Did you know all the Torah, but did you walk it?" The path is the ultimate testimony. The world may forget your words, but it never forgets your trail. In modern times, our paths are digital as well as physical. The messages we post, the opinions we share, the promises we make, each one leaves a trace. Salt them with truth. Do not walk the road of deceit, even when the crowd marches that way. For the salted path may be narrow, but it is steady, and it leads toward peace. Once a traveler in the desert asked his guide why he carried salt instead of extra food. The guide answered, "Because food may spoil, but salt will preserve whatever I find." So too in life. Possessions fade, but character preserves what matters. This Christmas, when you look back on your year, examine your footprints. Where have they led? Whom have they helped? If you find parts of your path that have grown bitter or uneven, sprinkle them with repentance and humility, the truest forms of salt. For every soul walks through wilderness at times, but only the salted steps find their way home. And when God looks upon such a path, marked not by perfection but by honesty, he delights, for it tastes of the covenant that never spoils. When God made a covenant with Israel, he said it would be a covenant of salt forever. Why salt? Because salt endures. It neither rots nor fades, it remembers. The sages taught that memory itself is a kind of salt. It keeps the spirit of truth from decaying across generations. The seventh and final place for salt is within memory, within the sacred archive of your life, your people, and your faith. There is a line in the Psalms that whispers, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill." The psalmist was not afraid of memory loss. He feared spiritual amnesia, the forgetting of purpose, of gratitude, of where the story began. Memory, when salted, keeps us loyal to meaning. To place salt in memory means to preserve the lessons of the past without letting them turn bitter. It means remembering pain not for vengeance, but for wisdom. Remembering love not for nostalgia, but for strength. In the Torah, Lot's wife turned to look back at Sodom and became a pillar of salt. Many see that as punishment, but the mystics read it differently. She became the embodiment of remembrance, frozen between what was and what could have been. Her story warns us that looking back without faith hardens the soul, but remembering with reverence preserves it. Salted memory transforms regret into resolve. It says, "I will remember, but I will not be ruled by the past." This is why Jewish tradition keeps memory alive through ritual. Lighting candles for those gone, tasting salt at the table, reading the same words each year. It's not repetition, it's preservation. Without memory, identity dissolves. A person who forgets their story becomes like unsalted water, clear but without taste. The Torah is filled with the command Zakor, remember the Exodus. Remember the Sabbath. Remember the stranger, for you were strangers once. Every act of remembrance is salt upon the soul. There is a Hasidic tale of a rabbi who visited a small village after a devastating fire. The synagogue had burned, and with it, all the sacred scrolls. The people wept. The rabbi said, "You still have the words, they are written upon your hearts. Carry them until your hands can write again." Years later, when they rebuilt, they said their new Torah scroll was salted with tears, and thus it would never fade. So too in our lives, memory can wound, but it can also heal if seasoned with gratitude. When you recall the losses of your life, add salt. Thankfulness for what those moments taught you. When you recall blessings, add salt again, humility, to keep them from spoiling into pride. At Christmas, the world speaks of light, of birth, of renewal. But none of these have meaning without memory, without the preservation of what God has already done. To remember is to keep faith alive. To forget is to begin decay. In practical life, salted memory means keeping old promises, honoring those who came before, cherishing lessons learned in failure, and telling your children where they come from, not as duty, but as love. A life without memory is like bread without salt. It may fill the body, but it leaves the soul empty. So tonight, when you look back upon your year, sprinkle a little salt upon your recollections. Let them be pure, honest, and gentle. Remember not only what hurt you, but what strengthened you. Preserve the blessings and let the bitterness dissolve. For the true miracle of remembrance is this, that even what once broke us can, when salted with wisdom, become nourishment for others. And thus the covenant continues, from hand to hand, from table to table, from soul to soul. Carried in the salt of memory that never spoils, never sleeps, and never lets light die. If this message has touched you, subscribe to the channel, leave your comment, and share your opinion. What is one memory you wish to preserve with gratitude this season? In the Torah, there are moments when God's voice thunders, at Sinai, in prophecy, in miracles. Yet there are other moments when his presence is found only in silence. The prophet Elijah discovered this upon the mountain. The wind came, but God was not in the wind. The earthquake came, but God was not in the earthquake. Then came a still, small voice, and in that whisper, the Eternal spoke. Silence is the 8th place for salt. It is where wisdom is preserved before it turns to noise. In a world overflowing with words, opinions, and constant motion, silence is rare, and thus holy. The sages taught, a fence for wisdom is silence, meaning silence guards truth the way salt guards food. Without silence, even the purest thoughts spoil under the heat of ego. There is a story about Rabbi Shimon, who once sat before his students for an entire hour without speaking. When one finally asked, "Master, why are you silent?" he answered, "Because salt does not need to shout to preserve." His silence was not emptiness, but depth, a way of letting wisdom settle. the way salt draws out flavor through stillness. To place salt in silence is to preserve reflection, to resist the need to fill every moment with sound. It means allowing your thoughts to mature in quiet, so that when you finally speak, your words carry weight and peace. The Talmud says that the tongue is surrounded by two gates, the lips and the teeth, because speech must be restrained by silence. The same is true for the heart. Without pauses, prayer becomes noise. Without reflection, action becomes chaos. In every sacred rhythm, from music to breath to the beating of the heart, there is silence between notes, between inhalations. Those pauses do not weaken the sound, they give it meaning. Salted silence works the same way. It purifies intention and allows the divine to echo within. Modern life fears silence. It rushes to fill it with distraction, screens, chatter, endless noise, because silence confronts us with ourselves. But it is in silence that the soul remembers its source. In silence, we taste eternity. To preserve silence is not to withdraw from life, but to deepen it. A person who knows how to be quiet at the right time holds immense power. The sages said, "Silence is the fence of wisdom, but also the throne of humility. For in silence, pride cannot grow." There was once a poor man who prayed each morning in a small synagogue. He never uttered a word aloud. When asked why, he said, "Because my tears speak better Hebrew than my tongue." That man's silence was salted, not empty, but sacred. Salted silence also teaches listening. When you truly listen, to another person, to your conscience, to God, you preserve connection. Most conflicts in this world come not from what is said, but from what is unheard. A salted listener hears beyond words. They perceive the heart. So, how do we place salt upon silence in daily life? It begins with small acts, pausing before replying, breathing before reacting, sitting alone for a few minutes without distraction. In that space, awareness ripens. The stillness becomes a vessel for understanding. Even creation began in silence. Before God said, "Let there be light," there was stillness, the potential before the word. That same stillness lives within you. This Christmas, find a moment of salt and silence. Sit by a window or beside a candle and let quiet wash over you. You may discover that God has been speaking all along, not through thunder or miracles, but through peace itself. Salt in silence preserves your spirit from the corrosion of noise. It reminds you that the holiest voice is sometimes the one that says nothing at all, yet awakens everything within. And when you rise from that silence, your words, few, simple, true, will carry the taste of eternity. When a person weeps, they bring forth the most honest salt on earth. Tears are the body's prayer, water touched by the soul. They are proof that something within us is alive, tender, still capable of feeling. The sages wrote that every tear shed in truth is counted before God and kept as if it were a sacred offering. The psalmist said, "You have kept count of my wanderings, put my tears into your bottle, are they not written in your book?" These words reveal that tears are not signs of weakness, they are the salt of the heart poured upon the altar of heaven. The ninth place for salt, therefore, is in our tears, the moments when the soul can no longer express itself through words. In the temple, no sacrifice was ever offered without salt. But when the temple fell, prayer replaced sacrifice. And when prayer fails, when pain is too deep for words, tears take its place. They are the purest covenant between human fragility and divine mercy. There is a story of a woman from Tiberias who came to the great Rabbi Yoshanan in despair. Her son was sick, and her prayers seemed unanswered. "I no longer know how to pray," she sobbed. The rabbi looked at her gently and said, "Then your tears will pray for you." She left comforted, not because her pain vanished, but because she learned that even silence can speak if salted with sincerity. Tears purify. They wash away pride, cleanse resentment, and open the gates of compassion. Even Yom Kippur, the holiest day of repentance, is called by some the Day of Salted Hearts, because its prayers often end in tears. But there is another kind of tear, not of grief, but of awe. When a person truly sees the beauty of life, the mercy that sustains them despite their flaws, they weep with gratitude. Such tears are salt from joy. They, too, are holy. Salted tears remind us that faith is not the absence of sorrow, but the sanctification of it. They transform pain into offering, loss into wisdom, and guilt into growth. One of the Hasidic masters said, "When you cry before God, you are closer to Him than angels, for angels cannot cry." The power of tears lies in their humanity. They show that we are not stone, we are soil that still yields fruit when watered. In our modern world, tears are often hidden. People fear them as though strength meant dryness. But the Torah teaches that even the Red Sea parted when faced with tears of desperation, the cry of a people enslaved. No wall is too high for a salted prayer. When you weep, for loss, for love, for longing, do not curse your tears. Bless them, for they mean that your heart has not decayed. Every drop of sorrow preserved in faith becomes a seed of healing. This Christmas, if emotion overtakes you as you remember those gone or dreams, yet unfulfilled, let the tears fall. Each one carries within its salt the eternal reminder that from pain, purity can still rise. Do not fear to cry before others or before God. The world teaches us to conceal tears. The Torah teaches us to consecrate them. They are the water that keeps compassion alive. And when the tears finally dry, what remains is clarity, like a sky washed clean after rain. The air feels lighter, the heart humbler, the spirit renewed. In that stillness you will know, the same God who receives your prayers in strength receives your tears in silence, and acts through both. For every salted tear becomes a seed of blessing falling into the soil of tomorrow. Time is the most mysterious gift God has given us. We cannot hold it, store it, or reclaim it once it passes. It moves like a river that carries everything, our laughter, our labor, our love, toward eternity. The sages said, "A moment is a small world, and a world is but a moment in God's sight." The 10th place for salt is within time, for even days can decay when they are lived without meaning. The Torah sanctifies time through rhythm. Sabbath after 6 days, festivals after harvest, years of rest after toil. These cycles are salt for the human spirit. They preserve memory, gratitude, and purpose in a life that might otherwise dissolve into endless repetition. To salt your time means to live deliberately, to pause before the day runs away, to mark what matters, and to offer your moments as sacred. When you say a blessing over bread or greet the morning sun with prayer, you are salting the day. You are preventing it from spoiling into forgetfulness. There is a parable of a merchant who once complained to a rabbi that his days disappeared too quickly. "I work, I earn, I sleep, but my life tastes of nothing," he said. The rabbi handed him a small pouch of salt. "Each morning," he instructed, "take a grain and say, 'Let this day not lose its flavor.'" The merchant obeyed. In time, he noticed that every hour felt fuller, every task more meaningful. The salt did not change his schedule, it changed his awareness. That is the essence of salted time, attention. When you notice the sunrise, when you truly taste your food, when you listen without rushing, you are preserving the sacredness of the present moment. The Hebrew word for remember, zakor, is used both for the past and for the Sabbath, because to remember is not only to look backward, but to live awake, to prevent today from fading into numbness. Salted time is conscious time. In the temple, offerings were burned quickly so that they would not decay. But their memory endured because they were salted. Likewise, our actions pass swiftly, but if they are seasoned with gratitude, they endure in eternity. There is a reason the Sabbath meal includes both bread and salt. Bread represents labor, the fruit of time, and salt represents permanence. Together, they declare that even the fleeting can be made holy if blessed. In modern life, we often chase time instead of sanctifying it. We fill hours with noise, forgetting that time is not a race, but a relationship. To salt time is to make peace with its passage, to understand that endings are not loss, but transformation. Consider this. Even the manna in the desert could not be stored overnight without spoiling, except on the eve of the Sabbath. Why? Because when time itself is sanctified, even what fades can endure. So, how can you salt your time today? Begin by noticing. Bless the morning before it begins. Close the evening with gratitude. Let no day end without one act of kindness, one word of truth, one breath of peace. The Torah says that the righteous are planted in the house of the Lord. Planted, meaning they live with rooted time. Their days do not scatter, they bear fruit. This Christmas, when the year comes to its close, look back not in regret, but in preservation. Take a mental pinch of salt and place it upon your memories, your mistakes, your milestones. Say, "These too I offer. Let them be preserved for wisdom." For time without meaning is motion without melody, but time salted with purpose becomes eternal. And perhaps that is why every moment, even the ordinary ones, matters. Because each is a vessel for the infinite, waiting only for a little salt to make it shine. There are seasons in life when even the most faithful heart trembles. Prayers seem unanswered, blessings delayed, and darkness stretches longer than expected. It is in those moments, when certainty dissolves, that faith requires its own salt. The Torah calls faith emunah, not blind belief, but steady trust. It is the quiet conviction that God's covenant still holds, even when the path disappears. The sages said, faith is not knowing that God can, but trusting that He will. But how do we keep that trust from rotting in despair? We salt it. The 11th place for salt is upon faith, to preserve it from the decay of doubt and fear. There is a story of a fisherman who once lost everything in a storm. His boat shattered, his nets torn, his savings gone. When his friends came to comfort him, they found him repairing the same nets by candlelight. "Why do you mend what you may never use again?" they asked. He answered, "Because the sea still exists." That answer is salted faith, hope preserved through loss. Salted faith does not deny pain, it purifies it. It does not demand constant proof, it endures in quiet trust. It is the faith of Abraham walking into the unknown, of Miriam singing beside a sea that had not yet parted, of Ruth leaving her homeland with only love as her compass. Every generation must learn to preserve its own faith. When miracles seem distant, we must remember that salt itself is proof of covenant. God told Israel, "You shall season all your offerings with salt," meaning, never let your devotion decay. Even when there is no temple, no visible altar, salt remains. Small, unseen, eternal. Salted faith thrives on remembrance. Each answered prayer from your past is a grain of salt for the future. Every trial survived becomes seasoning for trust. You may not see the full meal yet, but you have tasted the covenant enough to know it will not spoil. Faith without salt is fragile. It depends on feelings and circumstances. But salted faith is steady. It endures through silence. It says, "Even when I cannot trace His hand, I trust His heart." The Hasidic masters taught that doubt is not the opposite of faith but its shadow, a sign that faith is alive and growing. His salt needs moisture to work, so faith needs questions to deepen. The one who never wrestles never matures. Sometimes the salt of faith comes from tears. Sometimes it comes from laughter that survives tears. In both, there is purity. For God does not measure faith by certainty, but by endurance. To keep your faith salted, feed it with small blessings. Notice the sunrise, the unexpected kindness, the strength to forgive. These are daily grains of salt that keep belief alive. During the dark days of winter, literal or spiritual, remember this: the same God who created light also dwells in darkness. The covenant of salt was given to remind humanity that His promises do not expire. Even when everything else fades, He remains. If you find your faith trembling, do not panic. Hold it gently as you would a fragile lamp. Add salt, gratitude, patience, memory. Whisper, "The sea still exists," and soon the waves will calm. This Christmas, as candles flicker and hearts whisper prayers, let your faith be salted with trust, for God's silence is not His absence, it is the pause before the next word of creation. Faith that endures the night shines purer in the morning, and that light, though small, can preserve an entire world from despair. So keep your salt, that steady trust, that quiet yes to life, close to your soul. For in faith preserved, God still acts, unseen but certain, faithful as the covenant itself. Among all the forms of holiness the Torah teaches, forgiveness is perhaps the most demanding. It asks a person to release what hurt them without erasing what was learned. It calls for mercy without weakness, justice without vengeance. And because this balance is so delicate, forgiveness too needs salt. The 12th place for salt, then, is upon forgiveness. The sacred act of preserving peace where bitterness once lived. When two people made a covenant in ancient Israel, they often shared bread with salt. If one betrayed the other, the victim would sometimes pour salt upon the earth and whisper, "Let not this bond decay." It was not a curse, but a prayer, that even through pain, the memory of what was good might be preserved. Forgiveness, when salted, does not deny the wound. It purifies it. It cleanses resentment without sterilizing truth. Just as salt prevents rot but does not remove the scar, forgiveness keeps the past from poisoning the future. There is a tale of Rabbi Meir, who had a neighbor that mocked him daily. One night, after hearing that the man's child had fallen ill, the rabbi rushed to bring him medicine. The neighbor, ashamed, asked, "Why do you help me after all I've said?" Rabbi Meir replied, "Because I refuse to let your hate spoil my heart." That is salted forgiveness, mercy that preserves the soul from decay. To forgive is not to excuse. It is to choose purity over infection. Salt burns when it touches a wound, but that sting means healing has begun. Likewise, forgiveness hurts before it frees. Many people confuse forgetting with forgiving, but the Torah never commands us to forget, only to remember differently. We are told to remember Egypt, not to erase it. To remember the pain, but also the deliverance. To remember betrayal, but also the resilience it awakened. Salted forgiveness honors the full truth, the suffering, and the survival. If you carry an old hurt, imagine sprinkling a little salt upon it. Let it sting for a moment, then breathe. Tell yourself, "This pain will not rot my joy." That single act, quiet, unseen, is the beginning of freedom. Forgiveness also preserves community. Without it, every small offense grows mold. Relationships crumble, families divide, nations harden. Salted forgiveness keeps dialogue alive. It says, "I remember, but I choose peace." During the festival season, as people gather and old emotions surface, this wisdom becomes vital. To share a table is easy. To share it with someone who once wounded you requires salt, restraint, patience, humility. The sages taught that on the Day of Atonement, even God forgives himself, not because he errs, but to model mercy. Creation continues only because forgiveness renews it each dawn. When you forgive, you participate in that same divine rhythm. You imitate the eternal, you preserve love against time's corrosion. Salted forgiveness also includes forgiving yourself. The hardest person to pardon is often the one within. But if God allows new mornings, you must allow new beginnings. Your past may shape you, but it does not define your worth. To forgive yourself is to acknowledge the wound and apply salt, honesty and compassion, so it may heal cleanly. This Christmas, as lights glow and memories return, think of whom you still hold captive in your heart, whether others or yourself. Offer them salt, whisper, "You no longer owe me pain." In that moment, your spirit becomes light again. For forgiveness, like salt, has one purpose: to preserve life. It keeps faith from turning bitter, love from spoiling, and peace from fading. It reminds us that mercy is not forgetting wrong, it is remembering grace. And when the salt of forgiveness is present, even the broken pieces of the past become a foundation strong enough for new blessings to stand upon. All the previous salts, gratitude, peace, compassion, words, work, integrity, memory, silence, tears, time, faith, and forgiveness, converge in one final act: blessing. For in the Torah, every gesture of holiness culminates not in possession, but in giving. The 13th and final place for salt is upon blessing, upon what you offer to the world after your soul has been preserved. Blessing is the overflow of a heart salted by wisdom. It is not merely a wish or a polite phrase. It is a transmission of spiritual life. When you bless someone, you extend to them a portion of your preserved peace. The sages said, The one who blesses is blessed. Why? Because salt never loses itself by sharing, it multiplies its flavor. In ancient Israel, priests would lift their hands to bless the people after sacrifices seasoned with salt. Their message was simple. What you have offered is accepted. Now let peace remain. The salt on the altar symbolized endurance, that the blessing should not fade like smoke, but stay in the heart like flavor in food. There is a story about a traveling scholar who stayed in the home of a poor widow. She served him bread with only salt and water. Yet she offered it with joy, saying, "The flavor of salt reminds me that God's provision never ends." When the scholar left, he blessed her, "May your jar never be empty." Years later, he returned to find her table still set, her smile unchanged. Her salt, gratitude, and faith had preserved her blessing. To place salt upon blessing means to offer kindness that endures. Many give when emotions are high, but few give consistently. Salted blessing is steady generosity, help offered without pride, love given without demand, kindness remembered even when unnoticed. You can bless through a word that uplifts, a gesture that restores dignity, a prayer whispered for someone who will never know it. Each act leaves a trace of divine preservation upon the world. The Talmud teaches that the righteous are the salt of the earth, not because they dominate, but because they prevent the world from decay through their quiet goodness. Every time you choose patience over anger, empathy over judgment, truth over comfort, you are salting the world with blessing. Christmas, at its heart, is a season of giving. But the Torah reminds us that the deepest giving is not material. It is the giving of light. When your soul is salted, preserved from pride, greed, and despair, your light shines clear. You become the lamp that does not flicker in the wind. To bless, you must first recognize that everything you have was once a blessing received. Gratitude transforms possession into offering. A salted soul does not cling, it flows. And the miracle of blessing is this: it never diminishes the giver. When you share your peace, you preserve it. When you give your joy, you deepen it. When you forgive, you strengthen your own freedom. The rabbis said that when Lot's wife turned to salt, she became a warning, but also a reminder. She looked back in judgment. We are called to look forward in blessing. The difference between decay and sanctity is direction. So now, having learned the 7 and beyond places of salt, the table, the door, the heart, the tongue, the hands, the path, the memory, the silence, the tears, the time, the faith, and forgiveness, your final task is to become salt yourself, to preserve light in a world that forgets it too quickly. Before each day begins, whisper, "Let my presence preserve peace wherever I go." That sentence is your final grain of salt, small, quiet, eternal. For a life salted with blessing never truly ends. Its light outlives its body, its kindness echoes beyond its name. If this message has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your comment, and share your opinion. Tell me, which salt will you place first in your home and in your soul this season?